Hi, welcome back to Reading Pathways. I'm Matt, and today I wanted to do another of these videos where I talk about my most recent completed book and then bring you along for the ride of me picking my next book off my shelves randomly. So a little bit different in how I'll approach it this time as far as reading goes, because in my last video I posted, I detailed some of the November Booktube event reading that I'm planning on doing, specifically Dr. November, Die November, and Nonfiction November. So I have 3 books picked for those events, and they kind of take priority right now over just general reading, because I want to fulfill my obligation to try to complete those events. So, but nevertheless, I think what I'll do is keep on reading with those books, but then when I'm through with them and the time comes to pick something else, I'll have one in the back burner already ready to go, chosen randomly from the collection. So figure I'll do that today. But the book I finished reading, which was my last random choice from the shelves, was The Liars Club by Mary Karr. And, she's a poet, author, and she is probably most famous for this book, I think, which is her memoir, one of her memoirs, of the youngest part of her life. So this focuses on her life, age roughly about 6, 7, 8, in that range. And she has a few other memoirs. I think Lit is one of them, where it's in her later years a little bit. And Viper, no, that's a poetry collection. There's another one, Cherry. Cherry is another of her memoirs that covers some more, I think, late teenage years, early 20 years, like something in there. But this is basically her childhood. Some of the most vivid events from it, and they are definitely vivid. So basically what I wanted to do was first say a couple prefatory things. So I think I'm still working out how I want to talk about books I've read. I don't really, at least at this point right now, I don't really read, so to speak, with a pen in hand or a highlighter in hand or anything like that I'm trying to, annotate or take notes so that I can in the future refer back to or use as an aid to discuss the book or anything like that. I'm pretty much just read, at least right now. Maybe that'll change. So when it comes to talking about the book, I kind of just like to go off the cuff and, present sort of my takes on it, a few thoughts, a few ups and downs, but nothing too formal, nothing that I would really consider a review or anything like that. And the other thing is about this book specifically, I think when it comes to a memoir like this, and it's something so personal, and in this instance, I think it would be hard to not say traumatic, based on some of the events that take place in this book. It is a little hard for me, at least personally, to approach how to talk about it, how to talk about reactions to it, because I haven't read that many memoirs at this point, and maybe, these feelings will evolve the more I read. But for something so personal like this, I almost feel it's hard to have a take on it. It's hard to judge it a little bit in a way, because it is so in the province of Mary Karr, who lived these events, to decide how they're told and decide the medium in which they're told, and the method in which they're told. So, I can react to the book. I can react to my experience reading it, and a couple things I liked and didn't maybe. But it just strikes me as a particular type of book that to me personally is a little hardest of them all to feel comfortable, I guess, reacting to, if that makes sense. But, putting that aside, I wanted to focus on kind of 2 takeaways that are not so positive, I guess, and 2 to 3 takeaways that just things that will stick with me. And, I would say haunt me, more or less, is probably a good use of the word for this book. So, the basic idea of this is it covers 3 portions of her early life, one in Texas with her mother and father, one in Colorado a few years later when her mother has taken her and her sister from living with their father and brought her to a new life, basically with sort of a new boyfriend or new husband, and separated from her father. And then it circles kind of back to years later, back in Texas, and it jumps forward like 15 years, I think, into the future when she's already through college and stuff like that, and she gets reacquainted with her dad, and the family unit sort of reforms in a way. And that's sort of the track that this book follows. So as far as like the writing of it, it's interesting. I mean, it's obviously an adult writing her memoir of a specific time period when she's 6, 7, 8 years old. So it can be childlike sometimes. It can be, which I think is appropriate given the character, the main character that's being portrayed here. And certain events are looked at through the lens that is clearly childlike. And I think Mary Karr does a really incredible job of recapturing how she viewed these events through 6 and 7-year-old perspective. And also, I kind of appreciated too the writing tone and the writing style, and specifically the dialect. The Texas town that they live in this book is described by Mary Karr as being very industrial, and I think at one point in the book she refers to it as in the top 10 list in the country of most polluted cancer risk sites and things like that. The dad works for a refinery for Gulf Oil, so he's always stinking of oil and greasy, and that's kind of the vibe of the town. And also the language I guess it's not deep South, but it's more just Texan South of the United States. The dialect is very twangy and very Texan. There's a lot of sort of Texan isms in here that once you get used to them, very clearly strike you as sort of colloquial kind of sayings from that time period, from that specific area that Mary and her peers use when they speak. And so all those language devices in here definitely did a good job of planting you very firmly in deep in the heart of Texas in the early 1960s, both through the dialect and also through the childlike sort of verbiage sometimes that she uses. And so two things about the book that were just, if I had to say, possibly a little bit of like a negative takeaway for me would be first on language and the way it's written. It's sort of a minor thing, but it's just something that stuck with me as far as possibly a negative takeaway would be the use of tense in the book. So predominantly the book is written in past tense. I went outside and saw Daddy. I went outside and saw Mother. But it does flip into present tense quite often, where it will be, for example, Lisa and I get in the back seat of the car, and we look forward and see Mommy and Daddy, like that kind of thing. And at first, the switch into present tense only seemed to be done in connection with certain scenes, which were the Liars Club scenes. So what the Liars Club means is it's basically a group of buddies, sort of drinking buddies, that Mary Karr's father had when she was a young girl. And he would get together with them and they would shoot the you-know-what. They would drink, gamble a little bit, I think, and they would tell stories. And one of the stories that her father tells to his buddies, with her being present, and Mary was present for just about all the Liars Club gatherings, involved his dad. And he tells this story about how he accidentally hung himself, which Mary knows at the time, and she writes, isn't true because he's alive and well. So it's sort of the first major example you get of a major lie being told in the book, and a lie specifically by Mary's father to his Liars Club group. And so those are the Liars Club scenes when she's with his when she's with her father and his drinking buddies, and they're telling these stories and everything. And initially it seemed like she was going to use the present tense only in those scenes, and I liked it because it was a nice change of pace, and it really clearly signified, okay, this is a Liars Club scene. This is Mary with the father and the buddies, and we're in this right now. The present tense obviously changes the perspective from being something that you're recollecting to I'm in this scene now currently. And that's what it felt like. But I noticed from that point forward that I think she then slipped into using the present tense in other memories in the book that she recounts that are not the Liars Club scenes, which was fine because, you know, like I said, it did still have that enjoyable effect of taking things from the past tense to the present and kind of placing you directly in real time with what's going on. But I just thought that given the book's called The Liars Club and the scenes that take place in the Liars Club context are kind of the heart of the book, I mean, it would seem, that I thought maybe the present tense just should have been reserved for those scenes. I think it would have made them a little bit more stand out, a little bit more unique. But nevertheless, you know, that's kind of a small thing, and it didn't really detract that much, but just something I kept picking up on a little bit. And the second thing I would say, again, you know, this is Mary Karr's memoir of deeply traumatic, crisis-filled childhood. So the way she tells the story is the way she tells the story. But I just couldn't help feel a few times, again, in reference to the parents. So basically, the thing with Mary's mother in this book is you're gonna kind of hate her. I don't know if there's any way around that. I mean, the things that she does, the behaviors that she engages in around the children, to the children directly, dangerous, you know, completely off the rails, scarring. You know, you're led to a very easy road towards really despising Mary's mother and what she puts the family through and what she puts Mary and her sister through. And on the flip side of that coin, it's a little bit like the father is portrayed a little bit as sort of the anti that in a way. But, you know, he had his own major problems as well. Maybe just not to the extent of the mother. So alcoholism obviously is probably the number one thing here that transmits to both of them. Her mother was in another class of alcoholism. I mean, a whole nother league, and had some other, it would seem, had some other underlying issues that triggered her in a worse off direction in that regard. But the father was certainly not clean of that either. Daddy, as he's called, you know, throughout the book. And it just seemed occasionally that there would be scenes or there would be discussions of some traumatic event, sometimes brought about by the mother, and the father, Daddy, would be presented by Mary as sort of like the savior type figure. And she very well may have felt that way because when you have, I won't say like the worst of two evils, I guess, but, you know, he had his own problems with drinking. He had his own problems with temper. He got into brawls with people. He assaulted people for saying the wrong thing. He was a little flippant with sort of dedication to the family. Like there's a part when they talk about the family breaking down finally and the mother getting ready to leave the father and take Mary and her sister with her. And he's presented as sort of just saying, well, that's just how it is. You know, there's nothing I can do about it. So I think there were a couple specific passages in this. I wouldn't say as a theme for the whole of the book it bothered me, but there was just a few specific passages when a climactic or traumatic event was going on and Mary would start talking about how, oh, I wish Daddy were here, or, if Daddy were standing outside, I would run up to him and, he would do this or that to make the situation go away. And I guess I can't, substitute my own judgment for my feelings about that versus her living as a 7-year-old in this type of environment. But just for me as a reader of this, as a disconnected, objective reader of it, it just felt like some of those passages glossed over a little bit some of the flaws of her daddy in favor of him, But again, it's easy to do that. It must have been very easy to do that for her when the other option is her mother, who, not to spoil, too much, but was a whole nother level of creating trauma for her. So, that's something I thought about too throughout the book. And then, turning to some really good stuff. And, just a little note here. Another thing with me talking about books that I've read is I tend to have a couple big scenes or moments that really impact me that I take away from the book. And the rest of it, I find, unfortunately, starts to quickly, sort of drift away into haziness. So I tend to like to talk about those major things, and especially from a good point of view. But they're almost universally spoilers, or what most people would consider spoilers, I think. So another thing I'm working out with talking about books that I've read is how to address that, how to somewhat toe the line between spoilers and non-spoilers, and try not to give away like big moments. But on the other hand, I like talking about books through the lens of big payoff moments that I really resonate with from the book and take away from going forward. So if there's any desire that you have to not be clued in on anything like that in this book, then I would say maybe skip ahead of this part. But a couple big things. So early on in the book, there is, right off the bat, the book begins with a memory that Mary describes as, I think, her clearest memory, she says. And it involves a doctor, sort of the 1960s environment of sort of a doctor doing house calls. And it's the family doctor, I guess. And he's at the house, and there's obviously some crisis that took place. There's obviously some major episode that took place. And all you really get is her memory about the after effects of that, and the doctor being there checking Mary for marks. And it's sort of left at that. And so that's where she leaves it with chapter 1. And then you're kind of, from that point forward, you have that in the back of your head as like, okay, so what was going on there? What was the major event that led the doctor to the house to check for marks? And then about midway through the book, maybe, again, and this probably would constitute like a bit of a reveal or a spoiler, but you finally get the scene that caused that chapter 1. And it involves Mary's mother having what I guess you can consider a complete psychotic break, to the point where she calls, I think, the police. She has a knife in her hand. She's staring at the girls with the knife. Pretty sure she's extremely, extremely intoxicated, and they're worried she's going to kill them. And it turns out she calls, I think, the police, and basically reports that she has murdered her daughters. And so then once that's how that chapter ends. And once you read that, it's one of those payoff moments in a book that I really look for, where something lodged in here in chapter 1 comes back full circle, and you go, okay, so there it is. That's the event that led the doctor to come in chapter 1 and check Mary for marks, because obviously, that didn't happen, what the mother reported. But so, yeah, seeing that happen, that was a very powerful moment. And then similarly, there was this kind of a similar moment for me later, way later in the book. I believe it was, it's in the third part of the book, where Mary's basically an adult at this point. And so early in the book, there's a period where Mary's grandmother comes and lives with them. And she's sort of dying, and she's very sick. She's sort of has cancer, I believe. So she's deteriorating. Mary eventually ends up finding her deceased. But while she's with them, and it's her grandmother on her mother's side, so it's her mom's mom. She's a scary figure to Mary. You know, she is sort of a tyrant a little bit. She frightens Mary. She has eventually, I think the cancer gets to a point where she has a leg amputated, and she has a prosthetic leg with a kind of a shoe attached to it, as I'm sure everyone has seen at one point in time. But, you know, to a 6, 7, 8-year-old girl, the image of that prosthetic leg is frightening to Mary and sticks with her. And I personally can resonate with that. I mean, it's one of those things that as a child, you don't understand. You know, you might see someone with a prosthetic leg. And I can recall in my childhood seeing a few people, even some I knew, that had something like that. And when you're that young, you don't have an appropriate way to process it. You don't know why it's like that. You don't know what it means, and you're just a bit scared of it. And I think that's what Mary portrays early on in the book with her grandmother. And then fast forward to the third part, when she's an adult, she comes back, and don't know the exact specifics, but I know that she was up in the attic of their home, and she was looking. She came back from school, I think, to visit her dad, I guess, or someone, maybe, forget if her mom was still there in the house at that point, but she finds herself up in the attic, and she is looking through boxes and looking through papers and things. And she gets to a box and kind of pries it open. There's a few things on top of it, and she's sifting through things and old memories and photos. And then she moves some things aside, and there it's sitting, the prosthetic leg of her, you know, long dead grandma, complete with the shoe on it, just like it appeared to her back as a kid. And it didn't even end a chapter, that moment, but it felt to me like it was a chapter ending type moment. It's one of those where, again, I think she did a really good job of portraying her fear of that specific item and what it represented, her frightening, tyrannical grandmother, her dying grandmother, who she eventually found dead. She did a great job of portraying what that meant to young Mary, and then what it did to her finding it again as an adult unexpectedly. And I think that's kind of a feeling I would think anyone can sympathize with, of seeing a relic like that from your past that brings back these memories. And yeah, when she opened that box and found the prosthetic leg in there, you know, I'm going to remember that scene for a long time. So yeah, I'm glad I read this. I mean, and the last thing about this is I've seen some reviews of this a little bit since I finished it. Interestingly, that I didn't really think of this, but they kind of take the idea of the Liars Club and how some of the stories being told with her father's group were sort of fabricated and exaggerated and embellished and things like that. And they say, well, remember, this is Mary Karr's memoirs called The Liars Club, and she was a member of that. So for all we know, she could be part of the Liars Club still when she's writing this, and we don't really know how much is fact and fiction. I thought that was interesting. Of course, I don't know, and of course, I don't think you're supposed to know. I tend to take it at face value, what's portrayed in here. Some of it does seem certainly unbelievable, but I think truth is stranger than fiction, and the things that Mary went through with her parents and her family as a youth. But I just tend to take it at face value, and the way she portrayed it was very engaging, and overall, definitely happy to have read this. I don't know if I'll seek out her other memoirs. I think that the big segment of time that she jumps over in this book, I believe, might be covered in one of the other books, maybe Cherry. So I could see being interested to kind of fill in that gap one day, because it does sort of leave you hanging a little bit in this, what happened between ages like 10 and 22, like roughly in that period. But as far as Mary Karr's childhood, yeah, wow, it's quite a lot she went through, and I was glad to have read this. So those are kind of my thoughts on the Liars Club, Mary Karr, and then I'll try to do this next part quick, but I want to try to tack on to these book discussions, just the process of me running the random choice selection and picking my next read from here. Like I said, my November Booktube event reading will take precedence over whatever comes next here, but I figure I'll just put one in the back burner on reserve. So let me do that. Okay, so I ran the random number generator through my shelf choices, which were about 17 shelves to choose from. And it brought me over here to this shelf, which is sort of mass market paperbacks, as well as, I'm calling this tower here so far like a horror slash crime stack. It's sort of a mix of that. There's some horror stuff, but also some thriller crime type books. A little more on the side of horror though. But it's a small stack, but it's kind of the only area I have stuff like that in here, so I kind of group them together. And then this is just mass market paperback fiction with some naval stuff I just hauled the other day that I haven't really found a separate place for. But I'm putting this all together up here, and this shelf got chosen. So I'm going to go ahead. So there's 28 books on there that I haven't read, and I'm just going to run the random number generator here and see what I get. I counted from left to right, and then these, and then top to bottom up there. So I'm going to run 28, so 18. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So we land right on top of the horror stack. And so that brings me to Anne Rice, the Queen of the Damned. So I haven't read Anne Rice, and honestly, I was looking for Interview with a Vampire or Interviews with a Vampire, and I found this one day and I said, well, that's good enough. I want to read some Anne Rice vampire novel at some point. But my only concern is I don't know if this should really be read properly as a sequel to Interviews with a Vampire. The Vampire Lestat, I think is his name, right? It says, look for other novels in the Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire Lestat, The Tale of the Body Thief. I'm going to look into it, and I'm going to make sure that it's okay to read Queen of the Damned before reading Interview with the Vampire. I think it might be. If for some reason that doesn't seem kosher, then maybe I will put this one on the back burner, or maybe I could go to the library and try to get Interview with the Vampire and possibly read that first before this one. But if this can be read alone and that seems okay, then I'll go for it. So that's interesting. This will be the first horror I've read in quite a while. It might have been a little bit more apropos to last month in October with spooky season, but I don't know. It's not quite in the holiday season tail end of that yet, so we're still like coming off spooky season, so this could be appropriate still. But I've always been interested to read Anne Rice, her vampire books, and so Queen of the Damned, unless people say this should specifically be read only after Interview with the Vampire, I'll go ahead and do this one next after the current crop of Booktube event reading. So hopefully still in the month of November. I'm off to a pretty decent start with the Booktube reading, so we'll see how they all come together. But anyway, that's it. There's my next choice from the shelves, and thanks for watching, and hope to be back with some more updates soon.